The first part of the state capture report has detailed how SAA's wings were clipped. Former Board Chairperson Dudu Myeni is at the centre of the report. The lengthy document accuses Myeni of negligence, incompetence and corruption in running the national carrier. Let's speak to former SAA Acting CEO Thuli Mpshe about the report. Thank you so much, Ms. Mpshe, for your time. We really do appreciate it on this Saturday. I think just your initial response to the report, it speaks about how former Board Chair Dudu Myeni was at the centre of this. What is your initial response to part one of the report?
Good afternoon, Heidi. Thank you for the opportunity. My response is it's actually a very accurate reflection of my testimony and of the summary that the chair of the commission has put through. So I am very happy and satisfied about how it is recorded.
Do you feel as though this is a victory for you? Because it does speak about how there was no justification or reasoning for certain deals to be cancelled, and it actually ended up costing SAA billions of rands instead of making SAA billions of rands.
Yes, Heidi, I actually feel vindicated. When all these things was happening and, going through the very difficult times, and sometimes, when you look back and say, could I have done it differently? No, I couldn't have done it differently. And it's sad, it's unfortunate that SAA now has been sued or currently being sued by LSG Sky Chefs for the very same contract that I took such great length to advise, even get legal opinions to the board to inform them that there'll be consequences if this contract is withdrawn.
I want you to maybe go into further detail with regards to this specific contract. And the reason I ask this is because you had quite an unfortunate encounter with then chairperson of the board, Dudu Myeni, outside Parliament, where she basically attacked you, despite the fact that you had sent correspondence to the board regarding them that air chefs would no longer be the service provider to SAA lounges. Just take us through some of that testimony and that experience that you had specifically to this contract.
Yes, and just to give you the background that the contract had gone its course, followed due process, and as acting CEO, I was not involved. As a CEO, you're never involved. You get involved when the chief procurement officer informs you that the bid allocation committee has now recommended that this particular company needs to get the tender, and that they will have gone through the whole full process of the tender. So, and this was within my delegation of authority as the acting CEO at that point in time. So out of courtesy, common courtesy, I decided that I will inform the board that we are now going to be issuing the tender to LSG Sky Chefs. So it's when I informed the board that, first of all, it was quiet for a couple of days, and then suddenly, then the issue came back to say, why did LSG Sky Chefs get the tender? I then wrote in detail the whole process that was followed to the board to say that this is what happened. These are the reports from, because I got the information from the chief procurement officer, who helped me to compile a response to the board. So by the time we went to Parliament, I already sent them the response, which unfortunately they had not read at that point in time. So when we were in Parliament, the issue was raised. I don't know how it was raised, because this is an operational matter, an internal matter in the company. So the issue was raised to say, no, we believe that SAA has issued a tender, catering tender for the lounge. In fact, they didn't even say for the lounge, it's just a catering tender to a German company. So we were then questioned by members of the committee about the tender. So the then chairperson just said, well, we don't know anything about it. This management just make decisions without informing the board. I then responded, and the Chief Procurement Officer was there. He also responded. And then we responded to the questions that were asked by members of the committee. Upon leaving the meeting, we then went outside the parliament to wait for transport to go to back to Joburg, to Cape Town Airport, Cape Town International Airport. Then the chairperson started berating me in front of the people that were there, and it was quite a number of people. It was my colleagues who were in the executives who were requested to be at the parliament. It was the board members who were there, and she started berating me and saying, "You mean black people can't cook? Why is this a tender given to the Germans?" So I then said politely to the chairperson, "I've already sent a response. All the information that you're looking for is in the response. And I didn't think it was appropriate for us to be discussing this out in the open in the public like that." And then I walked away from where they were standing so that I can avoid a confrontation with her.
Speak to us about the kind of experiences you had with Dudu Myeni. I know that you've also been a witness, or you were at court with her delinquency matter, but you obviously worked quite closely with Dudu Myeni, and just hearing from this experience with this Air Chefs deal, what was the kind of experience that you had with her? How were interactions with Dudu Myeni?
The interactions, personally, she's a very nice person, if I have to say that. But when it comes to issues of governance, quite lacking on the issues of governance. And it didn't matter, irrespective. I always tried to respect the role of the board, and also I took responsibility to make sure that I educate, I inform the board about the company's policies about governance. And it didn't seem like she was interested in the issues of governance. I mean, there would have been, operational interference of, getting instructions of employing people or firing people, dismissing this one. And I would say, dear Chair, we have processes. If there's a vacancy available, then there's a process of advertising the vacancy and for transparency, and so that everybody can be available to apply for the vacancies. And you can't just bring someone from outside and give them a job. And so we need to follow due process. And she will also, decide that, no, we're changing the structure at this, for example, at some point, add a position of chief operating officer to the structure and appoint a chief operating officer. And at that time, we were busy with retrenchments and voluntary severances at SAA. So I would say, Chair, this is not an appropriate time to be adding a senior position that will cost the company a lot of money when we are actually retrenching people and retrenching staff at lower levels. So it wouldn't be prudent, and it wouldn't be ethical for us to be able to do that. And in some cases, it will be, appoint this person in this position who's within the company. We'll say, no, we have processes within the company. If there is a vacancy, and there were no vacancies at that point in time, we will then have to apply due process. So all the time, I was faced with either having to explain the policies or hiving off, on insistence. There was a time when the chairperson invited Mr. Kemi Mapato, who was the Minister of MKVA and Defense, who came with Mr. Van Rooyen, who became the finance minister for a short period, and saying that these people come here, they want to know about tenders. And then I would say, no, we can't expose or talk about information on tenders to external people. We can have the presentation and about informing them about what's happening in the company, and how, if they're interested in becoming part of our service providers, we'll help them, assist them to make sure that they can become a service provider. They will have to have a product or a service that they will have to then to be put on the panel, and then like everyone on the panel, when there is a tender, they'll all be informed of the tender, then they can apply. So we prepared for this presentation with the transformation manager at the time, the chief procurement officer. They visit, and they visit with some of the people who are in the administration of the MKVA. So when they came, we did the presentation, we planned the presentation, I informed the presentation and guided the presentation. Then they came, and then I asked the transformation manager, at the time, Mr. Tapelo Lahasa, to do the presentation, assisted by the chief procurement officer. And at the end of the presentation, I was then asked to summarize. I then summarized, and I said, we are really willing to work with them. We will have to then make sure that we sit with them, advise them on what they need to do to be able to apply, to be on the panel for SAA. We will have then to check what specific skill or service that they're providing, and then we will then assist them so that when tenders come through, they can then apply. He then said, in front of those people who we were meeting for the first time, and my colleagues, the transformation manager, the chief procurement manager, and all my colleagues in the executive committee, she said, just listen to her. These people are not interested in your policies and procedures. These people died for us. These people are the reason why we got our liberation in the country. We're not interested in your policies. Tell them what is the budget for jet fuel, and so that they can prepare themselves and align themselves in terms of jet fuel. And in any case, then she informs the visitors that in my role, I'm also the general manager for human resources, and then maybe we should have a policy that says there must be a 30% set aside, 30% of vacancies at SAA should then be preserved to the children of the MK veterans. I can go on, Heidi. I'm not sure if you want to.
Yeah, I'm just mind blown. I'm so mind blown that this actually happened, and I think this leads to my next question. You were acting CEO at the time. This is all unraveling in front of you. The state capture report has established in paragraph 28, I think it's the first couple of pages of part 1, that there was indeed state capture. The state was captured. As somebody who has years of experience and understands governance and ethical behavior, how did you feel at the time? I mean, being told nobody cares about policies when policies are there for a specific reason, and that 30% of jobs should be set aside for specific individuals. I mean, how did you feel when this was all happening in front of you?
It was very frustrating, you know, and having, you know, the person who understands the policies of the company, understand governance, and also understands the role of the executive, the role of acting CEO that I was at that time, and also the role of the board, that the role of the board is oversight, and the role of the executive is to implement the company strategy. So this interference was really, really frustrating. Not only that, it was illegal, and bordering on, and it was illegal, it was unethical. I mean, the one example I can quickly quote is that when Dr. Dawa, who was the chief procurement officer, came to my office and said, I've been asked to sign, to award 2 tenders to this companies, Gemicron and Quintessential, for this, the Swiss port and the jet fuel tender, which, so at the time, it was already, those tenders were held by Swissport and by Engine through a process. And they were running already for 2 years, I think, if I remember well, the Engine one. So how do you, midstream of a contract running, that you decide, no, you will stop it, and then you'll have a 30% set aside? Not only that, you will choose who's supposed to be receive, or the BE, supposed BE partner who's supposed to get 30% in terms of what they were talking about at that time, of a 30% as set aside. It was unethical. It was illegal. It was outside even of the BE process, which was being, at that time, even now, managed and the implementation managed by the Department of DTI, Trade and Industry. We even received a letter. There were complaints about the engine and Swissport contracts being forced, the company being forced to give 30% set aside. The DTI even wrote to us, the commissioner, acting commissioner at the time, wrote to us and said, what you guys are doing is illegal. Can you please stop what you're doing? And they were asking, and is that your policy? You need to change the policy. We said, no, it's not even in the policy. So they even advised us to say that, well, if this is what the company wants to do in the future, then you can then write, and at that time they were looking at the revision of the policy, of the BE policy. You can then write so that you can influence the policy. But for now, it's not policy and we should stop. They even went further to put it in writing to me to inform the board that they cannot continue to do that.
Sure.
Furthermore, the National Treasury, the Chief Procurement Officer of National Treasury, Kenneth Brown at that time, also wrote to me as the acting CEO and says, we have complaints about this. Please ask the board to desist from doing this. And then wrote back and says, look, we're a corporate citizen of South Africa. We'll comply with the rules. This matter is being pushed by the board, but we haven't changed the policy and we'll continue to comply with the policy that was applicable at that point in time. So all the time hiving off, all the time fighting back. And sometimes it became very, very adversarial. It became very, very difficult. And she will be very rude to me most of the times, and rude to me in the presence of my colleagues, that humiliating me and just denigrating me. And the strange thing was this, she's the one that insisted and appointed me as acting CEO. So really, those times were really difficult times. You know, when the report came out, it was bittersweet for me because it just took me back to the times and the struggles and the pain that I went through. And of course, on the other hand, and sweet in the sense that I'm now vindicated. You know, I've always been prayed throughout that whole trauma to say that, you know, I need my name to be cleared because I knew that all the charges that were put for me were just being charges that were done just to make sure that they get rid of me. And there was no ounce of truth in all the allegations that I had put through. Hence that finally there was never a formal disciplinary hearing.
Yeah, I mean, we could speak for hours and hours and days on end about what truly transpired. But I want to ask you a personal question, if you have any regrets, because, of course, it was a very difficult time. And, of course, you were there to provide a service. You're a public servant. You're working for the national carrier. But then you're surrounded by people that are pushing certain agendas, pushing certain deals, trying to award tenders to people that were not the right people to be awarded to. But do you have any regrets? Do you think that you put up a good fight, or do you think that you could have stayed a little longer and tried to make it work?
It was impossible for me to stay a little longer at that time. They just made it very difficult for me. I don't have any regrets, Heidi. If you ask me if I'll do it again, given the circumstances, I promise you I'll do it. I've always said, even to the chairperson at the time, to say that I cannot do something wrong when I know it is wrong. You know, you can make a mistake as a human being, but you cannot deliberately do something wrong. Not only that, something illegal, something unethical, and knowing that it is wrong. I don't have any regrets, and it comes at a cost. It cost me my job, and it cost me my reputation at that time. It caused me a lot of pain and suffering. My family was subjected to that humiliation that I suffered. And, you know, there were headlines when I was suspended. I won't forget. The headlines were acting CEO suspended for gross misconduct. You know, I have kids and they were exposed to all of that. My family was exposed to that. My husband was exposed to that. My siblings were exposed to that. You know, and my extended family were exposed to that. But if you ask me again, if that's a price that I have to pay, I will do it again. And I'm prepared to take the price. Because South Africa comes before all of us. South Africa is bigger than all of us. And we cannot be part and parcel of capture. When you look at what's happening in our country at the moment, starting with SAA, thousands of people have lost their jobs. Thousands of people have went through depression. They had to sell their cars. They had to take their children from these preferred schools that they had. They are out of jobs as we speak right now. And it's because of all this corruption and all the state capture. If you look at generally in the country, the social economic status, especially of Black people, it's appalling. Children are going back to school now, going back to schools that are not properly resourced. And some of them have still got pit latrines. It is really very sad for our country, and that the country had to lose so much money for people who were self-serving. And I can never sit and be a bystander. Even at that time, I wouldn't be able to sit and be a bystander, even if, and I was threatened many times that you must just remember you can be moved out of this job. You must just remember that we can deal with you. And they did deal with me, but I have no regrets whatsoever.
I want us to touch on the aspect of whistleblowers, because the report actually highlights the importance of whistleblowers and how if it wasn't for them and investigative journalism, it would have been very difficult to really understand what was going on in our country, in these state-owned entities. But there's a lot of pain and challenges and difficulties that come with being a whistleblower.
Yes, there is pain, there is suffering that goes with being a whistleblower. And the chair of the commission made recommendations. And it is my prayer that the recommendations must be implemented to the latter. And there is mention, which it's not quite specific at this point in time, when we accept that, this is part 1 of the report. And we hope that by the time we get the part 3, it will clearly be outlined as to how the whistleblower can be assisted, because a lot of the people have faced devastation as a result of exposing what we now know as state capture. And now we know even Babita Dokran was killed. She's lost her life, her children, her family has lost a family member because she whistleblowed. So I think the president must make sure that the recommendations are implemented to the latter. And obviously the circumstances are different for certain people, but there are other people who are affected more than the other. I mean, Dr. Dawa, who's a former colleague, I mean, her house was repossessed, had to lose the car, the children had to leave school, had to go back to Zimbabwe. To date, the elder daughter is still not able to be in a proper school because he's got no means to be able to do that. But had he been left to do his job, his family would have been in a better position. And he's got a permanent residence in South Africa. He wouldn't have necessarily gone back to Zimbabwe. And so there are a lot of people who've suffered, a lot. And those people are the heroes of our country. And they can never be forgotten, and they shouldn't be forgotten, and they shouldn't be left stranded and the situation made worse. So I really believe that they should be looked into, they should be looked after, and it should be implemented. In some countries, we know that they have laws that look after the whistleblowers, and the chair of the commission has made recommendations. Really, it's in the hands of the president to make sure that he implements and make sure that all those people are found, and the situation are being analyzed, and they're being assisted accordingly.